Thank you for joining me for another episode of Sam's Tech Stuff. If you're new to the channel, we do crypto mining guides and builds. We also do a lot of videos on miner configurations. Lately, we've been taking a look at building PCs. We'll be taking a look at some server builds soon. But if you're interested in that kind of content, definitely consider getting subscribed to the channel. So today we're going to be taking a look at swapping out the factory AMD cooler that came with the R5 2600X CPU with the Noctua cooler. I finally got my AM4 mounting kit from Noctua, so we're going to take a look at installing that now. And in case anyone was wondering why I didn't do really any benchmarking videos on the factory heatsink, that's because during rendering it basically got to about 88C after the Ryzen offset. So the factory heatsink is okay, but it's not really getting the job done. In fact, if you had one stock, I would actually recommend installing the Ryzen Master software and adjusting the turbo clock to make sure that you're not hitting that thermal slowdown. The Ryzen CPUs do become less stable as they heat up. So here is the Noctua D15 heatsink. This is the older version that did not come specifically with the AM4 mounts. Pretty beefy when you compare it to the stock one, so we'll definitely be taking a look at some overclocking and mining results. And I'll throw in some benchmarking for our rendering tests too. So we'll take a look at what's included here. In true Noctua fashion, everything is packaged really well and high quality. So here we can see all of the included parts, and we'll just kind of go through the instructions for installing the cooler. So according to the instructions, it looks like the D15 already has compatible side brackets. I'll show you right here in a close-up. A couple of their models do NH-D15, the S, and some of the lower profile ones, like the 90 and 120 millimeter heat sinks. Now that we know we have the correct brackets on, we can move to step 2, which is removing the stock retention module. So I'll take the heat sink off and remove that. This does require a lot of the pieces to be removed temporarily from the computer, just a heads up. The motherboard will have to be removed for this process. Set those off to the side for safekeeping. And then the assembly's out. A little bit stuck on the fan connector, but out. Now that it's out of the case, we'll go ahead and take the cooler off. These are thumb screws, but it's just easier to unscrew them. One important note while I'm unscrewing these, I'm actually holding the motherboard right here so that the retention plate doesn't fall down. So I'll finish taking these out and I'll show you. There we go. So here's the stock heatsink, and kind of like I noticed in the build video that I did on this, here we'll get it a little bit closer. That little copper base is basically nowhere near enough to cool this kind of CPU down. It doesn't actually touch the entire integrated heat spreader there. And this thermal paste is probably junk. So now that we have the heatsink off, we have to choose the orientation that we want the heatsink to be facing. Noctua is including both brackets. Now for my case, I have front to back airflow, and I've done a lot of testing to find out that the top and bottom fans don't really assist in CPU cooling. They are important for the graphics card, but they don't really assist in CPU cooling that much. So I do prefer to actually have front to back airflow. So if we take a look at this graphic, and then take a look at the motherboard itself, you can see where that retention arm is. Now that we know the orientation, we're going to want to remove the spacers and the longer screws. We'll get those set up on the board. Take this one out. These don't really seem to have an orientation or a preference, so it probably doesn't matter. And then we'll take the long screws out. So here's the board. I'm holding it by the bottom by the actual back plate. We're going to place the spacers right over where the back plate comes in. We're gonna tighten the screws in. We'll go right until it gets to a resistance point. Get the other opposite side. Then you just want to make about another quarter turn. Make sure it's tight. And then neither of these should wiggle. They should move basically with the motherboard. Now that the mounting mechanism is all set, this is probably a pretty good time to clean the old thermal paste off your CPU if you have any. I like to use a combination of alcohol swabs and just like a paper towel or a tissue. So we'll wipe this off real quick. I always try to wipe in circles and make sure that I get all of it. It looks like I was a little lazy with that part. And after a while, your alcohol pad, if that's what you're using, will get a little dirty. Fold it there. I always try to get the sides. It's not super important to get the sides like this, but it does keep the CPU a little bit cleaner. You probably don't want to get thermal paste on the socket there. It's not going to hurt anything, but it doesn't look the best. So now that we got that off, I will go over it with a paper towel once real quick. I'll do the same thing with the paper towel. Just try to go in circles here. And you can see even after the alcohol swab, there's still a little bit of thermal paste left on the paper towel here. I'll do one more round until that's almost white. It looks pretty good. We'll do the same thing for the plate. Looks like it's gotten a little bit of dust since I had removed it. This one's a lot easier because I already cleaned most of the thermal paste off. And then we'll hit it with the paper towel. The plate is actually raised. You can see there from the rest of it. So if you press too hard, you might actually end up getting little tears in the paper and it might kind of hang out, which you don't want. So I'll just brush away from the center here. Alright, should be all set to go. So for thermal paste, I actually prefer the Cryonaut Thermal Grizzly. This is some of the better performing thermal paste. But to be honest with you, the Noctua NH-15 performed almost as good as the Cryonaut on my 5820K. I would say the temperature difference under the most intensive loads, something like video encoding, really only came down to about 1, maybe 2 degrees Celsius. Which isn't a ton, but it is an improvement with the Cryonaut. So we'll definitely put the Cryonaut on. So now that we've got our board, we're going to put a little bit of the thermal paste on right here. I'm just going to do a dab in the middle. So now that we have the paste on, we will take a look at installing the cooler on the mounting bars here. One word of advice, try to grab the cooler by the heat pipes, not the plate, but the heat pipes, because the fins are actually pretty sharp. I know because I've only cut myself 4 or 5 times on them. And we'll get these screwed down. And the last little bit. Now we can actually get our cooler mounted. We'll just want to line these holes up here to where they correspond on the brackets. I'll get a picture of that real quick. And the same on the other side here. Here, we'll try to, so you can see it there. Now we just have to screw those in to finally tighten the heatsink to the board. You're going to want a longer screwdriver for this. When I do the Noctua mounts, I think it's important to do just a little bit on each side and then tighten the other. Otherwise you might be in trouble with these springs. They are pretty tough. And then I alternate every 5 or 10 turns or so. Now Noctua recommends not over tightening these. For the screw, once you can't go any farther, then it's basically time to stop. And that's it for that side. And we'll finish up this side. That's about it. Now that the tower is on there, we can put the fans back on. Here are the stock Noctua fans. They're both NF-A15s. They're both PWM fans. I do have the Y cable, but I do not have the low noise adapter. I don't find that these are actually very loud at all when they're spinning at full RPM, so I take the full advantage of their cooling capability. So since I have an exhaust fan that would be right here, I don't normally mount a fan on this side. I normally mount a fan on the outside and in the middle to blow this way. So we'll get the first fan installed here. These are the clips. Because of the RAM, I can only get the fan down this far, but that's about far enough. We'll get this clipped in real quick, make sure it's steady. Then we'll take a look at getting the middle fan installed. We'll slide it down here. This is as far down as it'll go. If you do that, it does get some more air on the heat pipes. I'm not sure if there's a huge performance benefit from that versus something a little bit more up here, but if you do leave it up here, you're not really getting a whole lot of cooling capacity out of the wasted space between the last fin and where the fan is. So we're going to leave it down here and pull these clips over. I'll try to show you here. So these are what the fans will look like clipped in. Like I said, this one is up so much because I have some G-Skill Trident sticks in there and they're quite a bit taller than the bottom fin, this one right here. So now that the heatsink installation is complete, I'll put the PC back together and we will take a look at the temperatures during a render of Sam's Tech Stuff video and our mining. What we should notice is that we actually get better performance out of both our rendering and our mining because now the CPU won't be throttling itself with the high temperatures. I would imagine the rendering will actually see the greatest improvement, but it's possible that the boost speeds for mining could go over 4025 megahertz, which would increase the hash rate. So we'll take a look. So now we're back into the operating system after switching out the factory cooler for the Noctua NH-D15. I have the miner running again. It's just getting up to speed here. Just hit about 500 hashes a second with all of the threads enabled. Looks like the CPU is holding about 4100 megahertz across all the cores, which is a little bit higher. It's about 75 megahertz higher. I thought it would boost a little bit higher given that the temperature under load went from about 65 C with the stock cooler down to 46 C, but it doesn't look like the programming in AMD's XFR technology is really taking advantage of that. So I'll have to take a look into manually overclocking the CPU in order to get a better hash rate. And to give you guys an idea of the benefit for the Noctua cooler, or just better cooling in general, right now I'm re-encoding the last video we did, the Ryzen 2600X mining. I'm taking it from the hit film output and converting it to an H.265 MKV, and I always do a preset of 20 for the quality. Looks like we're getting about an average of 30 frames a second. The CPU is boosting right up until about 2500 megahertz, which basically from what we've seen in the mining should be expected without manual tuning. TCTL and TDI are about 64 degrees. I would imagine once it levels out after a couple of minutes, we'll be looking at about 65 or 66, which is probably where you want to be for an AMD CPU. If you like this video, definitely go ahead and give it a like. If you're interested in more how-tos and video guides for building PCs or servers or mining rigs, definitely let us know in the comments section. Get subscribed to the channel by clicking the subscribe button down below, and if you want to get the updates for when we release new videos, hit that little red bell. If you want to support the channel, you take a look at the affiliate links in the description below. It definitely helps us out by using our affiliate link when you shop on Amazon, and it's free to you. You can follow us on Twitter at Sam's Tech Stuff or on Facebook at facebook.com/Sam's Tech.